All right, welcome in everyone. We're going to give folks probably about 30 seconds or so just to make their way into the room here. But thank you all for coming in and joining. Appreciate everybody joining us, especially if you joined us last night. We'll see who can get perfect attendance throughout this series of events here. Thank you all for joining. We're going to give probably about 15 seconds or so more, just to allow people to stream in here and get into the session. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure folks will join us as we go through. So want to be respectful of everybody's time, but thank you all again for joining and taking the time to join the session. Yeah, as you all met me, I'm sure you've seen many emails from me, but my name's Anthony. I'm the director of admission here at Emory University School of Law. Excited to have you all join us for our first event in this series of what we're calling Explore Emory. If you weren't able to make it last night, we had a kickoff session just to welcome everybody in and kind of explain, how this series will work. But we're just here, and this series is designed to introduce you to various folks here at the law school and learn a little bit more about the research, the work, the classes, just the atmosphere of being here at Emory and moving through. So we've got a great showcase for you today. Hopefully you've signed on today to learn a little bit more about the work we're doing here at Emory in the area of civil rights and social justice. So we're excited to have Professor Darren Hutchinson join us today to answer your questions, learn and explain a little bit more about what that work looks like here at Emory. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get started. We'll have plenty of time to get through questions. Logistically, if you do have questions that you'd like to ask for the professor, you can type them either in the chat box, or there's also a question and answer box. Please feel free to use either one. I'll be able to scroll through those questions, and we'll be able to unmute you and get you up in front of the professor to introduce yourself and ask your questions and get started. Learning a little bit more about Emory and our work here in civil rights and social justice. So without further ado, let's get some introductions done. So like I said, we're joined today by Professor Darren Hutchinson. Professor Hutchinson received his JD from Yale Law School, as well as his Bachelor of Arts from the University of Pennsylvania. Following law school, he was a litigation associate in New York City at Cleary Gottlieb. He also served as a clerk to the late Honorable Mary Johnson Lowe for the Southern District of New York as well. Prior to joining Emory, he was a tenured faculty member at University of Florida, Levin College of Law, as well as other positions at American University, Southern Methodist University, and the American University College of Law. He's also served as a visiting professor at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School as well. Here at Emory, Professor Hutchinson serves as the inaugural John Lewis Chair for Civil Rights and Social Justice, a position that we're extremely excited to have on board in the honor of the late John Lewis and the important work that he pursued. And we're excited to also have a new center coming online that will be pursuing work within that area as well. Professor Hutchinson in particular, his research and scholarship covers a wide range of civil rights and social justice issues, and really emphasizes the importance of viewing inequality as a multidimensional concept. He's been published all over the place in prestigious journals like the Yale Law Journal, California Law Review, Cornell Law Journal, UCLA Law Review, and the Washington University Law Review. So he's very well regarded in the field, and we're super excited to have him here at Emory now to work with our students and pursue this important work both here in Atlanta and nationally as well. So Professor Hutchinson, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Just want to hand it over to you if you wanted to say hi and welcome to everybody as well.
Right, yes. Hello and welcome to Emory Law School. I'm excited to have this chance to talk to you and answer questions that you have, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you in the fall as first year students. So welcome aboard, and I look forward to this session.
Yeah, Excellent. So, why don't we get started? Like I said, we're going to start with some prepared questions and work through those for the next 10 or 15 minutes, so just to warm up. Like I said, if you have questions, please use that chat box, use the question and answer function, and we'll be able to get to those for the remainder of the session for as long as we have questions. But why don't we start kind of back in the beginning? So, Professor Hutchinson, if you can kind of remember the days when you were a bright-eyed student, looking at law school and deciding if it was for you. What was your decision factor that ultimately led you to decide to go to law school and ultimately pursue work within the area of civil rights and social justice?
Right, thanks. I hope to consider myself bright-eyed today, even. But yeah, law school is a really important decision, and a lot of times students will make the decision and choose a school based on some criteria that really don't make much sense. And I was one of those. Like, I really wanted to go to the highest ranked school, whatever possibility that was, and I had to go there. And to some extent, location mattered, but really I focused on the rankings, something that a second time around I might not do again. But for me, really underneath it, the really substantive things that went into it for me were the course offerings that the school had, the types of professors, and really calling professors before I ever went and getting a sense of what their view about the school was. Back in the old days, before we had the internet and the opportunity to have discussions like this, I actually called the admissions office and asked for a list of alums and got on the phone, often calling director assistants to get names of folks, and called them up and said, hey, I hear that you went to Yale. Can you tell me about your experiences there? How did it shape your career? And that really, really was very important. So I'm asking you that you do a lot of homework before you ever get to law school to figure out where you want to go, because that choice is extraordinarily important. And it means interviewing and talking to a lot of different people, folks who are at the school now as students and as faculty, and people who were alums, and also just have guts and courage and call random attorneys and say, what do you think of Emory? Because part of it is just what the reputation of the school is with respect to the practicing bar.
Absolutely. And as you were enrolled in school, did you know at that time that civil rights and social justice was what you'd be pursuing, or was that something that developed as you started taking courses?
Right. So the interesting thing is a lot of people will come to law school saying they want to do one thing, and then they may end up doing another thing. So, and that's common because you're learning about the universe. So when I went to law school, I certainly had a passion for civil rights, but I thought that I was going to do more of an international and business law focus. And actually the job that I had as a first year associate, that firm was really, really popular for international corporate and commercial law. But during law school, my passion for civil rights just, expanded, and I was exposed to more courses on the subject. I was also exposed in a more detailed way to the scope of inequality and injustice in our society. And I decided to make a career challenging that and training attorneys on what they can do to make the world a better place.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. I can't tell you how many students I talk to who feel behind when they come to law school because they've got two, three, maybe four different areas that are interesting to them, and they just don't know exactly what they want to do. And I think it's really important to actually go into those experiences with that open mind and realize that the JD is flexible in that sense, right? And in your case, you may have started in litigation and in corporate and international, but doesn't mean that's what you got to do for the rest of your life. And you'll be able to explore that, at Emory and other different locations and jobs and all of that as well as you go through it. So I think that's a really important point. So thank you for sharing that. Switching back now to look at Emory, can you talk a little bit about your work here at Emory and what you see as the vision moving forward for Emory within the area of civil rights and social justice?
All right, so I'm relatively new, but really have hit the ground running, so to speak. So part of my life is just a regular professor. I know I have a fancy title, but a lot of it is just teaching students and writing and doing research. And I spend most of my time actually doing that. So I've been able to teach constitutional law throughout my entire career. That's the focus of my research. And so the in-class experience and the experience as a researcher go hand in hand for me with respect to constitutional law. And so that has remained a constant. But what's different about this role at Emory for me is that I have the opportunity to build this Center on Civil Rights and Social Justice. It's something that initially was not a part of the chair, but it's something that I negotiated coming in with the dean, expressing an interest in wanting to do more than just be Professor Hutchinson. I wanted to use the chair as a platform for bringing attention to issues of injustice and also to marshal resources to challenge and remedy the problem of injustice in our society. So really the largest project on the agenda for me is to build the center by consulting with faculty at the law school, at other parts of the university, and with the numerous stakeholders in the Atlanta community. There's so many different organizations that do civil rights work in Atlanta. And there are also big, important institutions like the CDC and various hospitals around the city that are really committed to having to really important research-driven solutions to the problems of injustice. And so that's what we'll be doing here as we build this center, is just pulling together minds who are committed to this subject and the energy around people, and really building the center into something that responds to the problems that exist not only in Atlanta, but worldwide.
Yeah, I think Atlanta's a fantastic, home base for that. Just given obviously your title with the John Lewis Professorship and the chair in that sense, and just the strong connection that the city has to figures like Martin Luther King and C.T. Vivian and the other civil rights leaders who, called Atlanta home in some way. And now we've got the King Center, the Center for Civil and Human Rights, the Carter Center, doing great work within those areas, as you mentioned, both here in Georgia, but across the nation and across the world as well. So I think that's an important piece that Emory can offer and can also provide societal impact for. So in regards to that, what impact do you see the center, your work, having both locally here in Atlanta and in Georgia, but also across the nation, really?
Right. So as a research center, the primary benefit I would say would be to influence research on social justice. And that could be producing scholarship in the form of law review articles, books, and other sort of academic materials in order to influence thinking on the subject of injustice. So materials produced by folks who participate in the center could be used as classroom instruction across the country at different law schools. And another component is to prepare, using that research to prepare materials for public policy debates. So hopefully we'll be able to influence legislation and public policy on issues pertinent to social injustice. One of the most important things to me, however, is to also have a student component to it. And a lot of research centers are just professors speaking to each other, either professors at that university or professors across different universities. And often students are left out of the equation, but I really want to have a strong student component. And that could mean students as research assistants and fellows who have an interest in doing civil rights work eventually, or who want to serve as research assistants for professors who do that type of work. Also, some ideas that are percolating would involve the center coordinating certain placements outside of the law school for students to get exposure to nonprofits that deal with questions of social injustice from a legal perspective, and also to have various career fairs, coordinating with the career office that already does that type of work, but helping to build the presence of social justice within the types of offerings and career opportunities that students are exposed to. So I'm very excited about it. I think it'll be unique in many ways that we're combining so many different aspects under one umbrella at the law school.
Yeah, I think that's super important too, and like you said, making it accessible for students to really get their hands on and have that impact as well, which leads great into the next question. Obviously, students are going to be wanting to get in and work in the center and take part in that. So, in your mind, especially for students today who are coming into the school and will be going through their 1L year, how would you want them to prepare, to join the center or be able to work into the center during that 1L year so that during their 2L and 3L years, they'd be able to really make the most impact and be, up front and able to join that center during those second and third years?
Absolutely. So one thing I would say is be patient. A lot of first years come in wanting to do extracurriculars and to work, but we're not allowed to, to have first years working. It's very important that you get a handle on the basic classes that are required of you. But having said that, there will be many opportunities for students to come to various workshops and programs that discuss different ways in which you can pursue a career in social justice, and also people who come in and talk about the relationship between social inequality and the law school curriculum. So we've done some programming on that already this year with a racial justice component for the first year curriculum, and it was sponsored by the law school and the center. And I expect to do much more of that in the upcoming year. And there was very, very good feedback from those programs. And a lot of students are very passionate, wanting to see this happen all year. And I promised them during those sessions that this is just the beginning. So hopefully we can have multiple sessions each month and students can attend. And I think it's a way of really getting, conveying to students the importance of social justice, but also feeling a passion. One of the worst things is to have a passion about something but have no outlets for it. And I felt that way a lot when I was in law school, that I really, really had this burning desire to think about social justice, but unfortunately, it wasn't the driving part of the force of the curriculum that I wanted it to be. So what I hope to do is create that space for students who share those interests, and even those who might not know that they have it, to spark some intrigue, and then to capture that passion and to help them channel it in productive ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's super important. You want to make sure that you have those avenues. It's really important, like the professor said, to make sure you're really grasping those fundamentals during your 1L year. I know that's not what everybody wants to hear, right? Is focus on grades and studying and mastering, but that core curriculum that you're going to get during that first year is so important to everything you're going to do during that second and third year, and will allow you to be much more effective in that work if you've got a really strong grasp on all of that. And you'll certainly see those professors during your 1L year. You might even have Professor Hutchinson for constitutional law when you go through your 1L year. And so you'll get interaction with those folks that you're trying to get, and then be really well set up for that second and third year to make that impact as you go through. So we're going to head into kind of the last prepared question here, and then we're going to turn it over to you all to have an opportunity to ask your questions. So I saw one question come in already. If you have your questions for the professor, please get those into the chat box, the Q&A, and we'll start lining up those questions and allow you to ask them. Please don't be shy. It's a great opportunity to get some FaceTime and get all that information out there as well. So for my last question for you, Professor Hutchinson, wanted to make it a little bit more fun, since you've been all around the country in different positions and through school and all that. But what have you enjoyed so far about being here at Emory and being in Atlanta in particular?
Right. So, I mean, I'll start with the last part, Atlanta. Atlanta is just such a different city. I've lived a lot of places. I lived in Dallas, Philadelphia, New York, New Haven, Connecticut, Gainesville, Florida. So from small college town to big urban metropolis, global metropolis like New York City. And in some ways, I always miss New York, like when I left. And so there's a relevance to this story. So what I tell my friends now is, wow, living in Atlanta is like the first time I don't think about missing New York because it's such a great city. So there's a lot to do here. People are very friendly. The arts are available. There's so much to get into. It's just a world class city, but not as aggressively hustle and bustle as New York. You can kind of take your time and it's easier to meet people. So for me, that's been very pleasant. With respect to Emory, I really enjoy the students. Students are very eager about learning. They're very passionate about not only just the subject matter generally, but they really are into civil rights and social justice. So that's been a very good thing. And I also find that students are very concerned about the quality of their education. So they're invested in sort of giving feedback and talking about how they would like to see the direction of their education go, which is a good thing. It's good to be invested in what you're learning rather than just passive consumers. So that I really do like the energy that students exhibit around the type of education they're receiving. So I came to Emory because I thought it was one of the best law schools in the country, and I'm happy that I made that decision. Emory is definitely a world-class law school within a world-class university and a world-class city. So you definitely really should think hard about not coming here. I think for all of you who are still making the decision, it's really about why wouldn't I go to Emory rather than should I go here? Because it's just such a great place that will open a lot of doors for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. As somebody who grew up in New Jersey, right outside New York City, I feel you on the missing New York. There's really only one situation like it, but really Atlanta has been fantastic, and I know for certain places, especially from the Northeast, right? It's not a lot of people see themselves, in the South or in Atlanta, but it's really a fantastic city. Like Professor Hutchinson said, it's got all your shopping, all your entertainment, your sports, concerts, all that. Great restaurants. Honestly, the food scene here is one of the best that I've seen. So it's a great place to come and live and work and study and get that out there as well. So thank you very much, Professor Hutchinson, for all of that. With that, we're gonna go over to our student portion now and have some students answer or ask you their questions. So I'm going to try and bring up Daniel. So Daniel, you should have the opportunity to unmute yourself. But thanks for joining. Thanks for your question. If you want to introduce yourself to the professor real quick and go ahead and ask your question.
Sure, I appreciate it. Hello, Professor. Hi, Mr. Batola. Great to be here today. Just was wondering if you might be able to speak a little bit about, of course, we've all seen the attacks on voting rights across the country and specifically in Georgia. So I wanted to hear a little bit about, voting rights options in terms of working on the issue, both in terms of coursework, maybe clinical work, and then also in the broader Atlanta community.
All right, very good. So Georgia, as you already know, based on your question, I'm guessing, it was just a place where election politics is so important, not just locally, but for the national stage. And so just giving students the opportunity to get involved with that is something that the center is working on. So I've been talking to various organizations that do things ranging from voter defense, which means on election day, people who run into problems at the polling place where they're not allowed to vote, to sort of work with established attorneys to help resolve some of those problems. Some of the organizations also think broadly about policy and make recommendations for governments with respect to how to shape election law to increase access. And even some of them are actually mobilizing to the extent necessary to vindicate those rights through litigation. So there are various opportunities that we're working on. And with respect to coursework that students could examine these issues currently, well, there are various constitutional law in your first year would certainly be the space for that. After that, upper level coursework on civil rights litigation, voting rights and election law, those are things that you should look for. And hopefully we will build in that curriculum more. We have been hiring and looking for people who do social justice work. So I see that as something that will be expanding over the next few years. And certainly while you're a student, you would have even more opportunities than exist today to build knowledge and expertise in that area. But a lot of the basic curriculum that we have, Emory is very rich in constitutional law, and those are places where you can explore these issues as well.
Great, excellent. So let's see. If you have questions, again, please keep typing them in. We'll keep scrolling through these as we go through. Keep them coming up. But next up, we've got Zoe Brown. So Zoe, you should be able to unmute yourself now and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, I'm Zoe. I was wondering what knowledge or experience you might have about the Equal Justice Initiative or the Southern Poverty Law Center. Those are two organizations I just have been really interested in, would love to intern for if I ever had the opportunity.
Right, that's a great question. Great, excellent organizations that do some of the most cutting edge and important legal work, not just litigation. I was going to say litigation, but actually they do a lot more than just file lawsuits. They actually negotiate and work with state and local governments to change policies in a way that are more meaningful and impactful for people who are poor and who are don't have access to power in the way that others do. So great to mention those. There are other important organizations in Atlanta as well, in the region that do work like that, including the ACLU. In terms of specifics about internships, I am not going to be the person that has the most expertise on that subject. And I hope that you will meet with, I'm pretty sure you will over the next couple of weeks, meet with folks in career services and also student affairs who can talk to you in more detail about externships. But these organizations are the types of places where our students would get placements. And because you're local, you can make those ties more readily than students at other schools that are trying to make those connections. And I've taught for a number of years now, and I know that the most important thing for you to do, certainly as a first year student, to prepare yourself for those experiences would be to do really well in your classes, to talk to professors at the law school who teach in subjects related to that. Even if you're not a student in those professors' classes, you can always look them up on the internet and say, hey, I'm interested in this subject. Do you have 5 minutes that I can come by and talk to you about it? And to try to get into some student group that could situate you for possible interview discussion so that you can go in and demonstrate a commitment to the issue. So your undergraduate is already established, but what you want to do is demonstrate an ongoing commitment to the subject of inequality. And the best way to do that is to just demonstrate it through your coursework and also by student activities. And one of the other most important things is folks like that come to law school all the time. So because they're local, we have people, there's a lot of foot traffic. And now in the era of Zoom, they may not come to the law school in literal terms, but they're workshops where they speak to students. And that's something the center will be working to build upon. It is imperative that you attend those things. And if you meet someone, don't be shy. Go up and say, hey, I really enjoyed your presentation. Do you mind if I send you an email? Right? You need to make those connections. Law school involves a lot of networking. It's something that I wasn't comfortable doing as a student, but it is so important that you shed those fears and be able to go up to people and say, hey, can I talk to you about X, Y, and Z? I'm really interested in X, Y, and Z. Because opportunity doesn't often just fall into your lap. It's something that you have to pave a road to reach. And there'll be a lot of people to assist you in that journey, but absolutely being outgoing is an extraordinarily important thing for law students to think about.
Thank you. That really helps a lot because I've been kind of divided on what to do. I know that's something I'm interested in. I have an offer from schools in the Northeast, but I felt like it might be a huge advantage to be in the South near these organizations. So your answer did really help. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. So appreciate that. And I know Olivia had a similar question that I think you also touched on just how to prepare yourself to do all of these experiences, internships, work in the center during your first L or 1L year. So I think that's super important as well. So thank you for touching that.
I would just, if I could just add to that a little. So another thing you could do as a first year, and this would be during the summer after your first year is over, a lot of students will get an internship that lasts, half of the summer, or it might be part-time. Another thing you can do is just try to split doing an externship with a firm or a public interest organization, but also working with a professor as a research assistant on some project involving social justice. So that's another way of building your resume to demonstrate that you have a commitment to this issue, and also scoring a credential that employers across the spectrum will look at in terms of recruiting students.
Yeah, excellent. That's also excellent advice. So next up, let's go over to Cynthia. Cynthia, you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I was just curious. I was thinking about I have interest in doing corporate litigation, but also working on social justice initiatives. So I was just wondering how was the transition for you from primarily being a litigator and then now working with social justice?
I was so hungry to become a law professor. It was the easiest transition ever. It's yeah, I can jump in, and I get the professors often say this, especially early on, is I get paid to read about the things that I want to read about. So that was always very fascinating. That was fascinating to me at the very beginning. But there is a transition. If you start one way and want to switch later, it can be daunting. It's often difficult to prove that you have a commitment to the issue or that you have the skill set to sort of make the transition, but it's not impossible. So a lot of the advice that I gave earlier would apply in this situation: making connections, having contacts, making sure that you do work to demonstrate a commitment to this particular area. So, for example, if you started in a commercial setting, doing a lot of pro bono work through most firms. The ABA has these standards about pro bono, and firms try to meet them. And so doing pro bono work is a good way of not only demonstrating a commitment to the issue, but also working on the issues and meeting other attorneys who work on these issues. You can also do volunteer work for organizations that might not be in a legal capacity, but other ways in which they need assistance while you're an attorney to keep those connections open as well. So it is possible to make that transition. And I've seen a lot of people do that over the years, where they start going in one direction and then they end up in another direction. And this is after they graduate. Another thing to keep in mind is you may make that transition in law school. It's very well possible. And it seems extraordinarily difficult and complicated and maybe discombobulating. And I thought that as well. Oh my God, I really thought I was going to do this. But one thing I like to tell students is, look, if you change your mind, and it might mean that you did something for 3 years or 2 years, and then you change your mind over the course of a long career, 30 years, what is 2 years? This is really nothing. And so don't be afraid to rethink your track. And the great thing about a JD is that there are so many different things you can do with it. So, and no one is going to say, oh my goodness, this person was doing one thing and now they want to do something else, because most lawyers have moved around a bit and they've practiced in different areas. It's something that's extraordinarily common. So I would say, be flexible as a law student, be flexible as a new attorney, and kind of follow your heart on this stuff. There are important reasons why people go into commercial law initially. Some of it is financial. Student loans can be very, very debilitating. But at the same time, you don't have to stay there if your long-term goal is elsewhere.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. And we're going to bring up Julia. She actually had a kind of follow-up question that I think fits in pretty well with that. How are you doing, Julia?
Hi, Anthony. I'm good. How are you? Hi, Professor Hutchinson. I hope everyone's doing well. But yeah, my question was along the similar lines. How do you feel about your ability to impact change in this civil rights space when you were a practicing attorney and doing some of that pro bono work that you mentioned versus being more in this academic space?
Right. So I actually was very fortunate. So in terms of pro bono, my experiences are unique, but I was definitely fortunate. So one of the cases that I worked on, starting as a summer associate at a firm. So summer associate is when you are over the summer, you work at a firm and they call you a summer associate. All right. And so I was able to work on a pro bono case. And then I went back to the firm and I worked on that same case and litigated it. It went all the way to the Supreme Court and made law. And so that was a very rewarding experience for me. I was able to write about it once I became a law professor. So that was extraordinarily important to me. And law firms, more so today than in the past, are really putting their money up for pro bono work. It costs firms a lot because instead of you doing paid work, you're doing work where the client does not can't afford to pay. So it is a cost investment, and firms are doing more and more of that today. So there's an opportunity to do that. Having said that, there are limitations. So when you're in a for-profit law practice, they want you to make money, regardless of a commitment to pro bono, and pro bono is not where it doesn't bring in money. So some people find that that's too limiting and they want to go full throttle into a civil rights practice, or like I did, into teaching. And I would say that on the academic side, there's a huge impact because, I teach hundreds of people every year, and those folks go out and become attorneys, and countless stories of how they call back, even ones who are not exactly in a civil rights practice, and say, there's just something you mentioned in one class and it made me think about this particular issue, and it changes the way I look at my clients or the type of policies I support as an attorney. And there are a lot of them who, say, I wasn't interested in civil rights until I took your class, and now that's all I do is I'm a civil rights attorney, and that's not why I went to law school. So having that voice, having that impact. Another thing is the number of students who actually read my articles. So one of the things that I found limiting in law school is there just weren't enough professors who were using civil rights research in their classroom instruction. Right, and that's a really important thing to do. Students need to be able to imagine the law in a very broad way. All right, so there's a very standard story about the law, and then there's stories by people who write about the law from the perspective of folks who are disadvantaged by the law. All right, so people who do work on racial inequality or gender inequality or poverty. And those stories were often missing from the law school curriculum when I was in law school. And frankly, that's still a problem today. And so one of the most rewarding things for me is to see not only my work being taught, but people who also do the type of research that I do being taught at law schools across the country. And so professors have that type of impact. And students can have that impact when they go out and practice law. One interesting thing is one of the students I was actually talking about, without naming that person, recently called me. Florida has implemented this "Don't Say Gay" legislation, which bans discussions of sexual orientation, but it's really about LGBT issues in public schools, and along with their ban on critical race theory. And this civil rights firm is developing a litigation around challenging some of those things. And so we had a long conversation about the possibility of firms working on this particular subject. So, that's an impact that's lasting. This is someone I taught over a decade ago, right? And so it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Thank you. It's very gratifying to know that, regardless of what avenue we take, we can get to where we want with effort and dedication.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Julia. So we've got probably about 5 more questions lined up that I think we can get to bring us home. So apologies if we're not going to be able to get to everybody's question, but we're going to try and get through as many as we can. But I see 2 more questions that kind of deal with the civil rights and social justice issues. So let's stick on that for now, and then we'll switch to a couple of questions more Emory focused. So let's bring up Hannah. Hannah, can you unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Hey, good afternoon. I hope you're both doing well today. Thank you so much for putting this together. My question focuses on prison conditions and the civil rights of incarcerated people, and whether there will be any opportunities in the next few years to get involved on the legal side of that. I've seen a lot of the policy side while I've been in Alabama for undergrad and my graduate degree. So I'm interested in kind of getting more into the litigation aspect of it.
Right. I mean, that's a great question. So let me just say, a lot of my research deals with criminal justice reform, and it covers the whole gamut of the criminal justice process, ranging from police surveillance, police abuse, prosecutorial misconduct and discrimination, and also the way defendants are treated during trials and at sentencing, but also post conviction, what happens to folks when they are incarcerated. So this is a very important subject, and I'm glad that you asked the question about it. When I was in law school, I participated in something called the Prison Legal Clinic, and we represented clients with a host of different issues. One of my clients was seeking parole back when parole was actually still a thing. It's now extraordinarily limited in the federal system and in many states, but I represented someone who had a drug conviction who was seeking parole. And another big case we worked on was an individual in prison who was attacked by guards, and we brought an excessive force claim. So really the way to do that in law school outside of study would be to try to get into a clinic that deals with those types of issues. So like a civil litigation clinic. And so one thing to do is to just explore the clinical offerings, talk to the folks who teach in the clinics, and talk to students to see if criminal justice reform issues are on the plate for those clinics, and to see what type of opportunities that you would have to do that type of work as a student while you're in law school. And the other thing is to also think about the type of placements you can have as a student while you're in law school, because part of the learning that you get in law school doesn't happen at the school. It might happen because the school is connected to all these organizations that also train students to become lawyers. So one thing to do is, over the next couple of weeks of this orientation, is to talk to the folks that run the externship and internship programs and see to what extent you can become involved with criminal justice organizations that do work on behalf of people who are incarcerated, or people who might or who are being prosecuted for crimes. So there are various ways to do that. Part of it is on campus, but I also want you to think very broadly that learning is it's a relationship between the university and the surrounding community. And it really starts with clinics, but it's much bigger than that. There's so many different ways that you can become involved. So I would say over the next couple of weeks, just ask those very important questions that you just asked me of the folks who are really there with the expertise on those issues. So the clinicians and the folks who run the internship program, and really that's the place to start. But also to keep in mind that Atlanta is just a hub of post-conviction work, right? So if you want to think about those issues and have access to the nonprofits that are doing this. Atlanta is just the hub of post-conviction work. It is. It just really is. There's no place where there's a richer practice than Atlanta.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you, Hannah. Appreciate it. So sticking on the theme, I wanted to bring up Katie. I think she had a really, really interesting question that's a bit pie in the sky, but I think we'll provide a good insight here. So how are you doing, Katie?
Hi, thank you guys so much for putting this on. Professor Hutchinson, I'm really appreciative of you doing this. I wanted to ask like a fun question, and it is pie in the sky intentionally because I think that it's more fun that way. But I wanted to ask, like, if you could change one law or implement one new legislation tomorrow that you think would have a great impact on civil rights and inequality, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, I would say if I and I would just reframe it a little bit rather than one law. If I could just change one legal approach, so because it could be in a statute or it could be the way courts decide cases. I would like for us to reimagine how we define discrimination. All right, so there's right now the law defines discrimination normally as an intent to harm someone. So I have in my head that I'm going to hurt you and I make a decision that hurts you, and that's discrimination. That actually turns out to be an extraordinarily limited vision of discrimination. And it's not one that is compelled by anything except those are the choices that lawmakers have made and also the judges have made. So I would like us to think of discrimination as a set of systemic practices that hurt people, regardless of what the intent was. Because if that is what the law seeks to undo, that harm, then we can have a much more robust form of equality in our society. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that's missing from our legal system. And it's something that I've written on extensively, is our very narrow, outdated form of thinking about discrimination that really works to preserve the inequality that has existed for centuries in this country.
Thank you. That's such an interesting answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Katie. So let's switch over to some more Emory-based questions as we go through. So Sophia had a question regarding, student and faculty relationships. So Sophia, welcome, and you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much, Professor Hutchinson, for being here and answering all of our questions. I was wondering if you could speak to relationship building between students and faculty and how you found the experience for students gaining mentorship and just building community more generally with the amazing faculty that's available on campus.
Okay, very good. So that's a great question, very important question. And I'll offer a caveat that I'm relatively new to Emory, but I can speak about myself. I've been teaching for decades, and student interaction is extraordinarily important to me. And part of it has been challenging recently because of the pandemic and sort of not always having in-school interactions, or when we are in school, you're covered facially. Those things are extraordinarily important for public health, so I'm not decrying that, but it does make it more challenging to interact with students under those circumstances. But what I've done is I try really hard to work with those conditions. So one thing I've done, I have 6 hours of office hours every week, knowing that I may have to shorten some of them, et cetera, but I just really want to be there for students. And it's over Zoom. So one thing the pandemic has done is to expose us and get us more comfortable with remote type of interactions. And I think that is kind of, in a way, allowed us to compensate for not being there for each other in person. And so I've talked to students a lot, get to know them, and as a part of answering their questions that they have about class, often things go into bigger conversations. What should I do in order to have this type of career? Or I'm entertaining offers for this type of company versus that type. What should I do? Those are the things that I just do all the time. And another thing I do is with research assistants, I always hire research assistants, and that's a really good way of becoming close to faculty. Emory allocates 1 to 2 research assistants for faculty members each one, and I think most of us take advantage of that. And so really just trying to connect to a faculty member through that is extraordinarily important. There are other ways to connect. Faculty will often be involved with activities such as moot court, where students are going and doing mock oral arguments, or there's also the mock trial component, and faculty are involved with supervising students who do that type of work. So I would say there are just tons of opportunities. And from what I can tell, the culture at Emory is extraordinarily supportive among faculty for having those ties with students. We're teaching because we want to be there with students. We want to help people grow and become better attorneys. If not, we could run off to some big firm and make tons of money, right? But a lot of people, we're doing this because we enjoy it, and students are an extremely, extremely important part of that. So absolutely, I know that my colleagues share my commitment to students, and it's really one thing I would say I emphasized earlier about networking. You have to view your professor as a resource. And a lot of students think, I'm just going to go to class and that's my interaction with faculty. But if a faculty member posts office hours, and they are mandatory at Emory, they were not, this is the first school where I taught where office hours were actually mandatory. I didn't need that requirement, but a lot of people do. So this is the first school where it's mandatory. You should take advantage of that. All right, you have to. Often there's a culture of I can't go and talk to my professor. I may sound dumb, or I may, just like get over all of that. When a professor offers time to speak to you, it's a gift. I view it as a gift. So you should definitely take advantage of that opportunity. And again, a school that has a culture where office hours is mandatory is just says something about the importance of students, in my opinion.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you, Sophia, for the question. So we're coming up on time. I think we've got one great last question from Jessica, who I'm gonna let ask the question herself before we wrap up.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you both so much for doing this. I'm excited for all of the opportunities this week to get to know Emory better from my home. So my question, I know you've done a great job talking about clinics and projects and student groups that we should be getting involved with, but beyond the scope of those types of initiatives for students to get involved with, what is Emory doing as an institution to become more anti-racist, more just for its students, but also as this powerful institution in the greater community?
Right, that's a great question. I'm going to apologize. The sun is doing weird things in my house right now, so I keep getting. All right, so no, that's a great question. So I think part of it, I gave a speech recently, the MLK speech for the university, and one of the things I said is social justice begins at home. So it's not an outward thing if you are not doing it in the place where you exist. And so one of the things that we've been working on is obviously to build a more just community at not only the law school, but across the university. And so one fruition of those efforts this year was the racial justice requirement for first-year students. Right, and so there was a whole day of workshops on racial justice where students took a break from their regular classes and attended workshops held by faculty and people who practice civil rights law outside of, as attorneys, to come in and host workshops on the importance of civil rights and to introduce them to the topic. And that's extremely important. It was required of everyone to do. And I think it was a very successful event. And we're going to do more and more of that. So there's one event this year, but I suspect that we'll have more and more of those next year as well. Another thing is we've launched mandatory social justice and sensitivity type discussions for faculty. And we had our first session last week. There's another one coming up, and it's mandatory that all faculty attend. And we deal with issues of social justice in the classroom and outside of the classroom that are pertinent to students and faculty. So these are ongoing initiatives. It sounds small, but I have to tell you that in terms of legal education, it's actually a big step. And so the goal isn't to say, okay, let's rest on our laurels. For me, the goal, and I'll definitely push for this, is the goal is to say, let's do much, much more. All right, this is like just waking up and putting on a shoe. It's not your whole outfit is not done yet. And so we're at the very beginning of this. And in terms of, I think one more important thing that you asked is what about the broader community, not just as a university. There's a lot of interaction that goes on between Emory and the broader Atlanta community. And the relationships are being improved and need to be improved. I'll say that. Town gown relations across the country is a very difficult thing. You have very powerful universities often being located in places where there's deep inequality and poverty. But those are things that we continue to work on. And in terms of the law school, the medical school, School of Public Health, we're building those ties. And I think there's a lot of momentum and support for doing that work with respect to the administration.
Great, thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So we're gonna wrap up now. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I apologize if we were not able to get to your question. Please feel free to follow up with any questions directly to me after we're done here, and happy to answer or make connections for you throughout the school as well. But Professor, as we close up, I always like to kind of ask one final question, just to kind of tie everything together. So that question is, what initially brought you to Emory, and what's keeping you here as a professor?
All right, so that's great. I mean, Florida's actually my home state. I grew up in Florida. I grew up in Gainesville, so I had made a decision to go back to Florida to live, and so the reason why I was able, to be persuaded to leave was, the great reputation of the school. Emory has a great reputation globally as a university, certainly as a law school as well. And that was extremely important to me. And the other thing was just the number of people across campus who do issues related to social justice, and having those resources. If I had a question that I wanted to ask a colleague about a particular issue I'm researching, so I can call up a historian and say, I'm doing some research on a particular part of American history. Can you direct me to some sources that can help me on this? And so those types of communications make us better teachers and scholars. And so just having that breadth of research at Emory was extraordinarily important to me. And then the second part is really the city. It's a great place to live. There's a lot going on. There's activities for everyone. There's a lot of things to do outdoors. If you like dogs, there are just dogs every. I have 2 dogs, I have 2 black labs, and it seems like I unknowingly picked like black lab mecca. Like everyone in my block has a black lab, so it's kind of interesting. So yeah, all of that is going on. You can make an impact in terms of the culture is huge, politics is huge. There's just so much to do here. So I'm happy with the choice that I've made, extraordinarily.
Great. Well, we're very happy to have you, and thank you so much again for taking an hour out of your time. I know you're extremely busy, but we appreciate it. I know the students appreciate it as well, and just being able to talk with you and learn a little bit more about Emory and the impact that all of this work can have, not just for them, but like I said, kind of what we touched on for the broader community and for the nation as a whole. So thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you all for taking the time to join us as well. I hope you learned a little bit more today. Like I said, if you have any questions after today's session, please send me an email, send me a message, and we will certainly get that information for you and make connections and welcome you here. But again, congratulations on your admission. Welcome to Emory, and we are so excited to see you here in the fall. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day. Hopefully we'll see you this evening at 7 p.m. for our Atlanta alumni hangout. But if not, we'll see you at some of the other events. So thank you all for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.